Their service is a part of America's history. Join us as we step into their story.
I was born and raised on a dairy farm in Georgia, and decided that I didn't want to mess with cows anymore for a while. Went to Boise State. They advertised West Point, and I just started sending in paperwork, see who could get the most paperwork in and get a return, and got accepted to West Point. After that just went from West Point into the Army and made a career out of it. Enjoyed every bit of it. When I graduated in '71, it was winding down, and the Army wanted lieutenants, second lieutenants, to do a year in a unit before they went over, at least most of us. And by the time my time came up or started, they said, it's winding down. We really don't need another second lieutenant to get in the way over there. Would you mind not going? So I said, okay, fine. Didn't go. I didn't go. I was here at Fort Hood doing mech infantry. And when the Vietnam War ended, I was on Reforger in Germany, looking at a German Panzer battalion, looking at my little APC, saying, we're in big trouble. Well, I volunteered for flight school while I was at West Point and had physical, everything else, and been accepted. But they wanted to, again, wait 1-2 years before you went to flight school. And about a year and a half in, they said, we got a slot for you. You still want to go to flight school? And I said, sure do. So went off to Fort Rucker, did my whole time at Fort Rucker, learned to fly helicopters. After that, I was assigned to Fort Rucker and worked my way into an instructor pilot job there at Fort Rucker, teaching other students to fly Hueys. Got thousands of hours in Hueys, as in either flying support or flying as an instructor, and it was just fun. I loved instructing. I loved working with the students, flying low level, nap of the earth, emergency procedures. It was all fun. Left Fort Rucker, and after flight school, went to TAC Intel course at Fort Huachuca, and then to Germany. They were forming up the 8th Aviation Battalion, part of the 8th Infantry Division. This was at Mainz-Fenton, and I helped form that unit and get it up and going. Flew Hueys, 58, OH-58 conversion, until I left there and was stationed in D.C. I was assigned to Davison Army Airfield, but got diverted into Military District of Washington in the headquarters building, into ceremonies and special events. Several of us doing it, and I did mainly Arlington Cemetery, and if a congressman or representative or senator died, I was the one that did the funeral. We'd fly out to give military support to them. Arlington Cemetery, monuments and statues downtown, working with embassies, assisted at the Pentagon, ceremonies at the Pentagon, assisted at the White House. I did funeral ceremonies, assisted with Omar Bradley. Anybody buried in Arlington, if it was Army, I did it, or made the arrangements. I didn't physically be out there with all of them. Also did ceremonies, Memorial Day and Veterans Day ceremonies at Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. A lot of coordination when groups came into town and wanted to lay flowers at the tomb. I did the coordination for that. And if it was a joint service, I would call out the different services, Marines, Navy, Coast Guard, Air Force. I had a phone on my desk with all the hotlines on them. All I did was punch a button. It rang into their headquarters, and I say, we've got a ceremony at a certain time. I need this number of troops and this kind of uniform at a certain time there. This is what we're going to do, and just went down the line. And they showed up. I coordinated with the VIPs, whoever was in charge of the ceremony, who doing the reef, or the generals, or the people from the Pentagon, and would relay that to the soldiers. And then when the ceremony started, my job was to get out of the way and let everybody else get the pictures. I went back to D.C., and when I first got there, did the inauguration. I was the operation officer for the inaugural committee for Ronald Reagan. We did the ceremonies at the White House, the actual parade itself, ceremonies at the Capitol, the departure ceremony for President Carter. like I said, I was the operations officer, so I was kind of involved in the planning of all of that. I did the Medal of Honor ceremony for Roy Benavides. I was the escort officer, planned that ceremony, and was the escort officer. Flew down to Texas from Virginia, picked him and his family up, brought him back, did the ceremony, and then took him back home. After I did the ceremonies, that was only about half my career. Then I went back to Germany with the 11th Aviation Group, did 3.5 years there. So I was flying again. I got a Black Hawk transition, UH-60, and I also got a fixed wing transition. Probably the Black Hawk, a lot different from the Huey. It had a lot more, I guess, sophisticated equipment, and the controls were different. Some of the, we call it negative habit transfer. You got in the habit of doing things in the Huey, and when you went to the Black Hawk, that didn't always work. You had to unlearn some stuff and relearn. So the transition into the Black Hawk was probably hard. As I was getting close to getting out of the Army, I went and got my ATP, Air Transport Pilot. Passed that test, and when I started looking for jobs, it was just too expensive to go take a flight test and still not have a job. So after I got out of the Army from Fort Lee, and I flew helicopters there, I went into, got a job as a civilian contractor. Flying was fun. I love flying. I flew civilian, owned an aircraft, would fly private myself. The ceremonies in DC was really interesting. Got to meet a lot of people there and work with them. So I guess just working with Army Aviation was probably overall the best.
America's military veterans, they wrote part of our country's history.